By April 1945, the Italian Social Republic was collapsing under the weight of relentless Allied pressure and internal insurrection. The fascist regime, once a symbol of absolute authority, was now fracturing into isolated pockets of panic and desperate confusion. Allied armies were driving northward with unstoppable force, liberating cities and cutting off vital supply lines across the Italian peninsula. Simultaneously, the Italian partisan resistance movement had grown into a formidable force, operating deep behind the crumbling fascist lines. These partisans were no longer just a nuisance. They were a coordinated army effectively encircling the remaining loyalist strongholds everywhere. Benito Mussolini, the man who had ruled Italy for 2 decades, watched his world dissolve into chaos and impending military defeat. With the Allies closing in, the dictator realized that his grip on power had finally slipped away into the cold reality. He began to formulate a desperate plan to escape toward the Swiss border, hoping to find refuge in the neutral mountains. Disguised in a German military coat and helmet, he joined a retreating convoy, attempting to blend in with the fleeing troops. The journey was fraught with tension, as every checkpoint and bridge became a potential trap for the disguised former leader. His flight was abruptly halted near the village of Dongo, where a partisan roadblock stopped the convoy for a routine inspection. The sharp eyes of the local resistance fighters quickly cut through the disguise, identifying the man hiding within the German truck. In that singular, transformative moment, the myth of the Deuce's invincibility was shattered by the very people he had once oppressed. He was taken into custody, his escape route permanently severed, marking the beginning of the end for his long-standing fascist regime. On the 28th of April, 1945, the final chapter of his life reached its grim conclusion near the shores of Lake Como. Mussolini and his mistress, Claretta Petacci, were executed, signaling a definitive end to the era of Italian fascist dominance. The news of his death spread rapidly across the country, acting as a catalyst for the final collapse of fascist resistance. Their bodies were transported to Milan, a city that had once been the birthplace of the fascist movement years earlier. In the Piazzale Loreto, the remains were displayed in a public act that served as a stark, visceral warning to all. This grim scene became a powerful symbol, representing the total disintegration of the authority that had once gripped the nation. The sight of the fallen dictator paralyzed the remaining loyalist forces, who now realized that their cause was utterly lost. Without their leader, the fascist infrastructure crumbled rapidly, leaving the remaining soldiers without a clear purpose or command structure. The broader conflict in Italy was now approaching its inevitable breaking point, as the German forces faced total isolation. With the regime dead, the German high command in Italy began secret negotiations to end the fighting once and for all. These discussions were conducted under the shadow of total defeat, as the Allies continued their relentless march across the north. The surrender was not merely a military decision, but a recognition that the political foundation of the war had vanished. As May 1945 arrived, the formal instruments of surrender were prepared, bringing a formal end to the hostilities in Italy. The German forces, once masters of the peninsula, were now ordered to lay down their arms and await Allied occupation. This surrender marked the conclusion of a long and bloody campaign that had devastated the Italian landscape for years. The end of the war in Italy was a relief for millions, though the country faced the daunting task of reconstruction. The fascist ideology, which had promised glory and empire, had instead led the nation into ruin and total occupation. The capture and execution of Mussolini served as the final punctuation mark on a dark period of European history. It was a moment of profound catharsis for the Italian people, who had endured years of war, famine, and political repression. The legacy of the fascist era would be debated for decades, but its physical power was extinguished in those spring days. The transition from war to peace was immediate, as the Allied forces moved to stabilize the liberated regions of Italy. Partisan units, having played a crucial role in the final months, began the process of reintegrating into civilian life. The streets of Milan and Rome saw the return of a fragile hope as the shadow of the regime finally lifted. The German surrender in May was the final piece of the puzzle, securing the Allied victory across the entire Mediterranean theater. History would remember these events as the moment when the fascist experiment in Italy was definitively and violently dismantled. The fall of the regime was not just a military victory. It was the reclamation of a nation from tyranny. As the dust settled, the Italian people began to look toward a future free from the constraints of the dictatorship. The events of April and May 1945 remain etched in the collective memory as a turning point for modern Italy. The collapse was swift, proving that the regime's strength had been largely a facade sustained by fear and propaganda. Once the fear was removed, the entire structure of the fascist state collapsed like a house of cards in the wind. The partisans, who had fought from the shadows, emerged as the heroes of a new, emerging democratic consciousness in Italy. Their contribution to the liberation was recognized by the Allies, solidifying the partnership that had ended the fascist threat. The German surrender effectively ended the occupation, allowing the Italian government to begin the arduous process of national recovery. Every village and city liberated was a testament to the resilience of those who had resisted the fascist occupation. The end of the war in Italy was a complex tapestry of military strategy, political collapse, and popular uprising. It serves as a reminder of how quickly even the most entrenched regimes can fall when their legitimacy evaporates completely. The images from Piazzale Loreto continue to haunt history, representing the ultimate price paid for the pursuit of absolute power. The war in Italy had been a long, grueling struggle, but its conclusion was marked by a sudden, decisive shift. The final days of the regime were characterized by a frantic scramble for survival among the fascist elite. Most of those who had supported the regime were now trying to distance themselves from the crumbling political structure. The surrender of the German forces brought a quiet, somber end to the violence that had plagued the country. Peace, while fragile, finally returned to the Italian countryside, allowing for the beginning of a long healing process. The narrative of the fascist fall is one of inevitable justice, where the consequences of tyranny finally caught up. As the Allies established control, the focus shifted from war to the reconstruction of a shattered, war-torn nation. The legacy of these events remains a cornerstone of Italian identity, defining the transition to a post-fascist state. With the war over and the regime gone, Italy stood at the threshold of a new, uncertain but free future. With the Duce captured and executed by partisans, the once formidable fascist regime in Italy collapsed into total, irreparable disarray. The death of Mussolini left the remaining German forces in Italy isolated, leaderless, and facing a truly hopeless military situation. Cut off from any hope of reinforcements, these troops watched as their supply lines were severed by constant Allied aerial bombardment. Facing a relentless Allied advance from the south, the German defensive lines across the Italian peninsula began to crumble quite rapidly. Soldiers who had fought for years were now exhausted, demoralized, and increasingly aware that the war in Europe was effectively lost. The German command, realizing that further resistance was entirely futile, began to contemplate the necessity of a total military surrender. High-ranking officers initiated secret and desperate negotiations with Allied intelligence, hoping to secure terms before the total collapse occurred. These clandestine talks were conducted in absolute secrecy, often under the constant threat of discovery by fanatical SS loyalist units. The delicate process required navigating complex political channels while the front lines continued to shift under the pressure of battle. Eventually, these high-stakes discussions culminated in the formal and historic agreement that is known to history as Operation Sunrise. This agreement was a masterpiece of wartime diplomacy, aimed at preventing further destruction of Italy's historic cities and infrastructure. On the 2nd of May, 1945, the unconditional surrender of all German troops stationed in Italy finally and officially took effect. Across the entire front, from the mountains of the north to the plains of the Po Valley, the fighting suddenly ceased. This decisive moment brought the brutal, exhausting, and long-running Italian campaign to a definitive and welcome close for all involved. It occurred just days before the final victory in Europe, providing a crucial precursor to the total defeat of Nazi Germany. The surrender served as both a powerful symbolic and a necessary practical end to the long nightmare of Italian fascism. With the fascist apparatus dismantled, the path was finally cleared for Italy to begin its difficult transition toward a new democracy. Liberated from both the weight of foreign occupation and the internal grip of a dictatorship, the nation reached a turning point. The political machinery that had gripped the country for over 2 decades was now permanently broken, signaling a new, uncertain era. As the dust settled, the Italian people emerged from the shadows of conflict to face the daunting task of national reconstruction. The removal of the fascist state allowed for the return of political parties and the slow restoration of civil liberties nationwide. Historians often look back at these final days in April and May as the definitive birth of the modern Italian Republic. The transition was not without its own internal tensions, as various factions vied for influence in the post-war power vacuum. However, the primary objective of ending the war and removing the fascist influence had been achieved with remarkable finality. The Allied forces moved quickly to secure the country, ensuring that order was maintained during this fragile period of transition. Cities that had suffered under years of occupation began the long process of healing, clearing rubble and restoring local governance. The legacy of the partisan resistance remained central to the national identity, representing the fight for freedom against tyranny. Every corner of Italy felt the shift, as the symbols of the old regime were removed from public squares and buildings. The end of the war in Italy was not just a military victory. It was a profound cultural and political transformation. Families reunited, and the focus shifted from survival in the trenches to the building of a stable, peaceful, future society. The international community watched as Italy moved away from its wartime alliances, seeking a new place in the post-war order. This period of change was marked by both relief and anxiety, as the nation grappled with the scars left by conflict. The collapse of the fascist state provided the necessary space for new voices to emerge in the political discourse of Italy. By mid-1945, the country was fundamentally different from the one that had entered the war only a few years prior. The lessons learned during the fall of the regime would go on to shape the constitution and values of the new republic. Ultimately, the end of the war in Italy stands as a testament to the resilience of a people seeking their liberty.